شريعة ربنا نور به نسمو على النجم به نحيا بلا ذل
The prophets and messages that you would find in the Old Testament, like Abraham and Noah and Moses, have told the people to believe in and worship in one God and do good deeds.
Yeah.
And that is the right pathway to God. And so we believe that the Prophet Muhammad was the final prophet that came to basically crystallize this message for all people. And he came to obviously the primary audience of the Arabian peoples of his time, but by extension to all of the human beings on the face of the earth for all time. So that's basically the thesis, the Islamic thesis, in a nutshell. I think the major difference between Muslims and Christians, there is a great deal of overlap. And in fact, Muslims are told to acknowledge the previous dispensations. So things like Christianity and Judaism, we're told to acknowledge the previous dispensation. In fact, the Prophet has been told to affirm the reality and the truthfulness of Jesus Christ, for example.
Okay, let me ask a question here. If that's true of Islam, why isn't Islam and Christianity working together to do what Jesus taught?
Now, this is where the point of difference comes along. The Islamic thesis says that we should follow the previous dispensations in their original message, but that somewhere along the line, Christianity as a religion was distorted in terms of. No, that's the message, right? That's what we believe.
But you still believe that Jesus was a prophet and you need to do what he was taught?
Yes.
So we as Christians believe that Jesus needs to be listened to, he needs to be believed, and we need to do what he's taught.
Yeah, exactly. So we would say
why aren't we doing that together?
We would say that Jesus Christ, what he taught wasn't that he believed that he was God himself or the Son of God.
I'm not talking about that.
Yes.
Jesus said love your neighbor.
Yes, yes.
So why aren't we doing that?
Why aren't we doing that? Jesus says love your enemy.
Yes, yes.
Why aren't we doing that?
Well, that's a good question.
Jesus says take care of those in need. Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we doing it together?
You're right.
Why aren't we doing
That's
it
a good
together?
point. It's probably the hypocritical nature of human beings in a general sense. I think you're
So
right.
I think we need to get rid of our
Why are we taking
pride.
care of each other? Why are we killing each other?
Yeah, this is what
Who's
the thing.
killing
We need
each
to get
other?
rid of our pride.
Christians are killing Muslims,
Yeah.
Muslims are killing Christians.
And Christians
Why
are
are we
killing
doing
Christians
that?
as well.
We need to
Christians are
humble
killing
ourselves
everybody.
and work
Muslims are
together.
killing everybody.
Well,
They're
now-
killing innocent people.
Well, I mean,
Why
yeah.
are we doing it?
Human beings are killing human beings, I guess.
But often we do it
Out
in the
of,
name of our faith.
Accepted.
and that's wrong.
Yeah, all right.
That's very
Yeah, I
Why are
agree
we
with that.
stopping that?
I think that if you look at the broad, if you look at the broad strokes of history, from like, even if you look throughout the medieval period, where you had the 100 Years' War, and you had, even in England, the country that we live in, right? You had the tensions between Catholics and Protestants. Obviously, before that, you had the Crusades. I mean, you had lots of things which, from a Christian perspective, a lot of Christians were using colonialism. Christians were using their faith to justify these things. Nowadays in the international relations scene, we see that Muslims also use their faith to justify acts of terror and things like
Absolutely.
that. So we say that that's wrong.
It's wrong.
But what I would say is
Our
that
Christian
yes,
tradition has never done that.
Yeah.
the tradition has to be distinguished from those who follow it.
Our Christian tradition, the Mennonites, have never done that. They
never
have
done?
never killed for their
Mennonites.
belief.
The Mennonites.
Oh, okay. So
We're
We've never
Mennonites.
killed for our beliefs. We've died for them.
Yeah.
We've had everything taken from us for them, but we've never killed for them.
but you do consider yourself Christians, yeah?
Absolutely.
I would say I'm more of a Christ follower. I want to do what
Yeah.
Jesus
Yeah.
taught.
All right. So I would say to you that it's a fallacy. It's a logical fallacy to make a sociological extrapolation from either historical perspective or contemporary perspective, and then make a judgment on a religious tradition based on the sociological extrapolation. It could be the case that people who follow a faith are following it wrong. So, for example,
And I would say most of our Christian tradition follows it wrong.
yeah, okay.
And I would say
So-
some
and that-
Muslims
And what do you
too.
say about Islam?
Same thing. I would say that the majority of people that are Muslims, the 1.8 billion, would not be representative of the Islamic tradition. I'm not representative of the Islamic tradition. I try my best to, let's say, follow the Islamic tradition, but I'm certainly not representative of it. And that's why we have to be mature enough, I think, in the age that we're living in, to kind of differentiate between that which the followers of the religion do as compared to that which the religion says it is.
Yes.
Which we have to go to
Absolutely.
religious books for that. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So I think generally speaking, unfortunately there has been a media narrative in the 21st century, a meta-narrative I would argue, that is kind of pushing the argument that, okay, well look at how bad religion has created the world. I mean, look how bad religion is, because look at the world, how it's all, people are killing each other. But I would put to you as well, I would put to you that
I agree with you.
if you look at the 10 most deadliest conflicts as per casualties of people that have been killed in all times, you'll find that the majority of those, yes, are in fact secularist type wars. Like for example, World War II. World War II, I think 40 million people were killed in World War II. Some estimates say more than that.
Yeah.
And that was the deadliest war of all time. And it was nothing but a secularist, nationalistic conflict between European nations who were obsessed with colonizing parts of the world.
Yeah.
The same thing applies with World War I, you could argue,
Yeah.
right? Which is not in the top 5, but certainly the top 10 of deadliest wars that have happened. Another thing,
Oh, look at Vietnam.
yeah, Vietnam. I mean,
That was pure secularist.
yeah,
That was
so-
materialism, is greed.
exactly, right? So I would put to you that if we were playing the game of using sociological extrapolation, either whether it be historical or contemporary, in order to make a judgment on a particular ideological tradition or religious tradition, then really secularism and nationalism would be the most to blame, if you
Yeah.
think about it.
Yeah.
So-
The quest for territory.
Yeah,
the quest
I
for
was
wealth.
actually looking at the numbers recently, and there are different numbers obviously in history. But to be honest with you, in terms of the deadliest conflicts of all time, I would put to you that in terms of religion, Islam is actually at the bottom of the list. Of the 6 world major religions, people that are responsible for deadly conflicts, Muslims are at the bottom of the list as it relates to if you look at the historical timeline. At the top of the list, if you talk about religion, is Christianity.
Yeah.
If you think about colonialism, for example, the colonialization of the Americas, yeah, a lot of that was premised on a Christian proselytization and missionary work. The colonization of Spain, if we're talking about, once again, the Crusades, if we're talking about the 100 Years' War, which is an interwar between different Catholic and Protestant warring factions, these are actually the most deadly wars of all time, and they were committed by Christian peoples.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that that's a reflection of Christianity, though, because me and you have both read the Bible, we've both read New Testament, we've both seen what Jesus has said,
Yeah.
right? But if we were playing that game, the Muslim wouldn't necessarily be. I mean, one of the most deadliest wars of all time was Mongolia, the Mongolian Empire, and their dissemination of different peoples and stuff like that. And that at first was not Muslim, although some historians say that the Mongolians became Muslim thereafter. So I guess what I'm trying to say to you is, humans are humans, right? You know, the
Humans are
Quran
humans.
says a really
Yeah.
interesting thing in chapter 3.
But
go
our
ahead.
faith calls us
Yes.
to be different in a human world. Present a different approach as God calls us to.
Yes.
So yeah, we can say that's human. We can say that very often people from our own traditions are acting in a way that's human. They want power, they want wealth, they want those sorts of things. But what are we doing to counter that? As people who believe that Jesus was a prophet, we believe Jesus was more than a prophet.
Yeah.
If we're going to take him seriously, we need to do what he says. And that's
Absolutely.
counter to that. And why aren't we doing that together?
I think that is a good question that we ought to put to people. I mean, I don't think people are following Jesus' message or Muhammad's message or any religious message in a full sense, because they'll always be kind of obscured by these kind of sociological / political motivations that they may have. And that's why that's the danger of, once again, social extrapolation to judge a religious tradition.
But I'm not trying to judge a religious tradition.
Yeah.
I'm judging my own.
Right, okay.
I'm not judging yours. I'm judging my own when I say these sorts of things. How do we bring that about differently?
Yeah.
How do we? I mean, our tradition says we're in the world but not of the world. We live differently. We try not to buy into the sociological norms. We try not to buy into greed and power and those things that corrupt us, those things that create much of the evil that we have around us.
believe that we need to work for peace. And that starts with dialogue. That starts understanding each other. So having these discussions.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. Yeah, so I think it's important to have these discussions. Also to understand our purpose in life. I genuinely believe that if more people had meaningful conversations about purpose, that's why we're here, right? What are we actually doing on this planet? Because at the end of the day, if human beings are not grounded and anchored with a purpose, then they'll have tendency to be left to their own devices and have quests for money, greed and these things. And so I'll put to you that the purpose of life is simply to worship God. That's
And I would put to you that the greatest act of worship is to do what he says.
I agree with that. Yes. So the question is now, who is God?
I don't have an answer to that. God's mysterious. I believe that when I do what God says, or when I try to do what God says, I can get a closer understanding of who God is, but I can never define God. I can never say God is. All I can say is, I know God is real. I know God is present. That's as far as I can go.
And I would go one further. I would say that God is love. It's not this,
God is love.
It's not division or hate or anything, or trying to say one religion is better than the other, or you need to convert to this to get to heaven or whatever. God is love, and you need to start with the basis of love.
Can you tell me something about your particular? You said the Mennonites.
The Mennonites, yes.
What does that mean?
Mennonites are one of the traditions from Anabaptism. We believe Jesus is who he says he is.
So who does he say that he is?
We believe he says he's the Son of God.
Okay, not God.
No, he's the Son of God.
Yeah.
Okay, not God.
We believe that because Jesus is who he says he is, we need to take him seriously.
Yeah.
When he says love your neighbor, we need to love our neighbor. When he says love your enemy, we need to love your enemy. We can find nowhere that it says killing your enemy is loving.
Yeah, of course.
Take care of those in need.
Yes.
Live simply so others can simply live. Be generous. Be forgiving. Be gracious.
And live in community with each other. You need to get to know each other.
We believe in the priesthood of all believers, which means there's no superior religious leader. We're in it together. We need to understand faith and life together. We need to wrestle with it. We need to talk about it. We need to be vulnerable about it. So we've been kicked out of some of the best countries in the world because we won't fight wars.
Yeah.
We won't kill for our religion. We'll die for it. Many have died. We've lost land. We've lost homes. We've lost everything we've had over the centuries.
Yeah,
yes, we're
pacifist.
pacifists.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And we've set up, the Mennonites have set up a number of peace organizations around the world, have worked for peace for 5 centuries.
Mennonites are right in Palestine, Israel, Palestine, working with the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Right there.
So what's interesting is you don't believe that Jesus is God, though.
Well,
Jesus is the Son of God.
Jesus is the Son of God.
Well, 3 in 1.
The
I mean, if you go to the
Trinity.
Trinity, then
Yeah.
yes, Jesus is
Oh,
God.
okay.
Yeah, it's all Holy Spirit.
But to understand a distinction, I mean, for human understanding, we need a distinction.
Right. So the thing is, what we would say, right, is that this idea of the Trinity was a later development.
Yeah, like the 2nd century,
Yeah. So it
which is
wasn't-
400 years before Muhammad.
yeah. Okay.
So Muhammad rejected it.
All right.
Because you've got Origen, you've got Athanasius, you've got, or who else would have been in that time period, that already wrestled with these ideas, saying that there was 3 in 1.
None of them said that there was 3 in 1. Justinian, Origen, all of these church fathers, none of them mentioned the Trinity. The Trinity was first mentioned formally in the Creed of Constantinople in 381.
But it had to be present before it was mentioned there.
Well, it wasn't really, because if you think about it, if you look at the kind of previous, in 325 in Nicene Creed,
But that's still 200 years before Muhammad.
it doesn't make a difference where Muhammad was in the equation. It really doesn't.
I think it does.
Why?
Because he's rejecting a part of tradition that he claims to be a part of.
No, it's not that. It's because if you think about, the claim is this, right? The claim is that Jesus Christ came from God. He's a Messiah. He's a messenger, right? But that for political reasons, for historical reasons or whatever, when Christianity entered the Roman Empire, that there was a development of what then was called
He gets this
the
from the
Trinity.
new atheists.
The new atheists?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, not necessarily. We believe in this anyways. This is part of our belief as Muslims.
Okay.
Is that where you get? Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So we would say that there was a slow transition from Binitarianism to Trinitarianism. That's why you'll find that, for example, if you look at 325, the Nicene Creed, yeah, the Holy Spirit is mentioned, but he's mentioned as Lord, but not as God. But in 381, he's mentioned as God. And you'll find that in that time period between, you have the Arians or the subordinationists who argued against the idea of a formal Trinity and the fact of co-equality between the three gods in the Trinity, or the three persons of God, or whatever. So I guess what I'm saying is that since we can see that this is a development which has been absorbed, possibly because there was Greek myth, and if you look at most of the ideas of the Greeks, a lot of it was gods and semi-gods and demigods and heroes and all these things. But you had literally a god and his son, yeah, like so Zeus and Hercules or something, yeah. And this could have easily been absorbed by those who putting the creed together, such to the extent whereby the Trinity was then formed. And if you think of
But
it,
not having been there, you can't say that's what really happened.
well, you can't say anything for certain.
Right.
So that what I've just said here is to some extent me trying to put the historical dots together. But what I can tell you is that what isn't speculation is that in the beginning of the mission of Jesus Christ, that from what we can see, the early communities like the Ebionites, they didn't believe in the idea of a Trinity. The church fathers did not believe in the idea of a Trinity. So you've just mentioned some of them, like Origen and Justinian, or
Tertullian.
yeah, all of these church fathers did not recognize the idea of a Trinity. In fact, most of them were more along the lines of, either subordinationism, Arianism, monotheism, really, which is more in line with the Old Testament tradition of these prophets coming to their respective peoples and telling people to worship one God. So the idea is the truth has not changed from the time of Moses to Jesus, for example, right? When Moses was telling his people to worship one God in a unified form, and it's not three persons, and the fact that the Old Testament doesn't mention anything of a Trinity in any sense, and the New Testament doesn't even do that in any explicit sense, although there are some passages in
He's
John.
trying to say that Christians are polytheistic and not monotheistic.
No.
So we're heretics.
No, we're one God.
One God.
Yeah, but if I say is Jesus God, or is the Father God, is the Son God, the Holy Spirit God,
All in one.
so that would be three gods that I'm holding up. You see
No.
what I mean?
So, for reference, do you see the Shekinah of the Old Testament being distinct from God?
Pardon?
The Shekinah.
Yes.
That's mentioned in the Old Testament. Is that distinct from God?
Well, I mean, look, the thing is, this is what I think. Yeah? I genuinely believe a lot of Christians will superimpose their Trinitarian belief system on the Old Testament narrative in order to bring about this forged idea
That's
of
not the question I asked.
Okay.
What is the Shekinah?
You tell me. You can educate me.
Well, you know the Old Testament. You're telling me about the New Testament. You're telling me about what happened.
Please
What is
educate-
the Shekinah?
You can educate me, please. Tell us.
The Shekinah is the Spirit of God.
Okay.
It's not distinct from God.
The one mentioned in Genesis in the beginning, like the first chapter, yeah? And his spirit
Well,
hovered
it's
over.
mentioned in a few places throughout the Old Testament.
Okay.
Is the Spirit of God distinct from God?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't see that it is a god in and of itself. I don't think it is part
is
of.
it?
It isn't. What is it then?
Well, it's not mentioned as a god in the Old Testament, is it?
No.
Okay, so
It's
from
sometimes
that
mentioned as the breath of God.
Fine, but it's
So
not
is it
mentioned
God?
as a god, as a separate god, as a
But is it
personality. No, it's not God. No,
It's not.
the Old Testament doesn't say that. Does
So
it?
it's something distinct.
Yeah, it's not God.
Would the Jewish people recognize the Shekinah as being distinct from God?
Well, that's a good question. I think they would not see it as God. Yes.
Okay.
And if you look at any exegesis of the Old Testament, Like for example, in Genesis,
Oh, he tripped over the stand.
in Genesis 1, I think it's Genesis 1, isn't it?
That's one of the places, yeah.
In Genesis 1, where the Shekinah is the Spirit of God. That almost all the
Exciting conversation. Carried away.
all the exegetes, right? I don't think any of them said that this Spirit was a God in and of himself.
No.
Yeah. Which is the point I'm
But
making.
is it God?
No.
Is it distinct from God?
I don't know, to be honest. I have to look at the exegetes.
See, I would believe that is God. It's not, the Spirit is God.
Have you got
it's
any,
not
like,
distinct from
You
God.
ask him what the Jewish people said, like
Yeah.
the scholars of the Jews. Has anyone said that is what you're saying it is?
I haven't asked.
Okay. No, I haven't
And I
said
need
it.
to, so.
Yeah,
I
but
have,
what
I
I
have a
do,
friend I'll ask.
what I
Yeah,
do,
we have a very
Good,
strong
yeah.
friend.
But what I was saying to you is that this is the point, right?
Yeah.
So the truth has not and cannot change. From the Old Testament, the mentions of the Trinity are not present
No.
explicitly or implicitly. The idea of there being any other persons of God, and I'm being explicit with my usage of words here,
Okay, yeah.
any other persons in God, yeah, or as part of God, is not mentioned in the Old Testament whatsoever.
Okay.
So I would conclude that from an Old Testament reading, it's impossible to come to a conclusion that the Trinity is in fact a present.
But this is why we believe in the New Testament as well.
Yes.
But then even the New Testament.
New Testament does speak about the Spirit, three in one, and Paul states something.
Paul, yeah, I would agree that
Yeah,
Paul mentions
Paul.
it. Yes, Paul makes it very explicit, and that's part of
So
the,
we're looking at,
So
year
then-
50, 60.
yes. So Paul, in his books, I think he wrote 13 books of the New Testament. Is that correct? Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
No, not that
No,
many.
not that many.
9?
We'll find out.
Well, because some of them are questionable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd have to think through it. But yeah.
So anyway, Paul, I would agree, introduced idea of Benitarianism. He was explicit, but then what we're saying here is that Paul was part of that historical development of the Trinity.
Okay.
But it's not Jesus, is it? I mean, Paul is not Jesus.
No.
Jesus Christ has never said, right, that I'm God.
Jesus said he was God.
When?
Jesus has said he's the Son of God.
Jesus said in many cases, the Son of God, Son of Man.
Yeah.
He also
Yeah.
claims to be the first and the last.
Yeah.
Revelation chapter
The Alpha and the Omega.
Okay.
The beginning
but
and the end. One with God.
when did he say I'm God?
I have to look up my Bible.
When did you say it was God? You didn't say it was God.
Revelation chapter 1, verse 18.
What did he say?
Revelation
He said, I'm
1:18.
the first and the last.
He's okay.
Alpha
So
and Omega, first and the last.
Which is the same.
As God, right?
Yep.
So
Who's the
Melchizedek
first
is God.
century. What's that?
Melchizedek is God then.
So why would he claim something?
Melchizedek has been referred to as the Alpha and Omega as well.
Melchizedek was never referred to as the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last.
He was always there.
Melchizedek was talking about being eternal, okay? But Melchizedek said, for example, Jesus himself said, I am the first and I am the last, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Behold, I was dead and I am alive. He only clearly referred to Jesus.
Okay, but it didn't say I'm God.
Hang on, it's very own words. So he said, well, did Muhammad ever say I'm a prophet in the Quran?
Actually, there are places in the
Did
Quran
Muhammad
where he's,
did Muhammad ever say, I'm a prophet in the Quran?
the Quran is a speech from God.
No, did Muhammad ever say in the Quran, I am a prophet?
Yes. Well, in the
Give me the eye and the sword. Give me the sword and the eye.
There's many places actually.
Muhammad himself said, I am a prophet.
Well, God is instructing the Prophet to tell them that.
That's different.
Muhammad, it's not Muhammad
That's
speaking.
different. That is different. When Muhammad himself said, I am a prophet,
Muhammad doesn't speak in the Quran. It's a
so
speech
this is
from
think
God.
about it. Thank you. So you admit that
No, Muhammad
is not a
doesn't.
prophet.
Muhammad, the Quran is a
So you
speech from
admit
God.
on the basis, on the same basis, that Muhammad is not a prophet. You asked the question, did Jesus
What is
say?
the Quran?
You asked the question.
What is the Quran?
Where you asked the question, okay?
But what is the Quran?
Did you or did you ask the question?
The Quran
Did Jesus
is
say, I am God, okay? If you're actually asking those exact words, I am God, no, he did not. But he made claims, okay? He made certain claims.
Well, the thing is, the Quran is meant to be a
He
speech from
made,
God.
he made claims about himself, okay, that clearly refer to him being a supreme deity, to be God Almighty himself. The question is, when he spoke those claims, was he a prophet? Jesus is a prophet, yes?
Yes.
So it was he a true prophet or a false prophet?
What are you talking about?
Was he a true prophet or a false prophet?
We believe he's a true prophet.
He's a true prophet. In which case, why do you not believe what he said about himself?
What did he say about himself?
He said, I am the first and the last, I am the Alpha and the
Okay.
Omega, the beginning and the
So
end.
do you believe that if a priest...
Did he or did he not say that? Did he or did he not
We
say
don't
that?
know if he said that, because the Bible has been corrupted.
No. You make the claim that the Bible's been corrupted.
So
How
you
can
don't-
claim?
you don't accept that?
No, you're running away from the point, my friend. You're talking about the Bible, okay?
You asked me if,
You're
if
talking
it's-
about the Bible, my friend.
What's your name?
I'm Steve.
How you doing? You okay? I'm going to pray Maghrib and come back to you. Maghrib is a sunset. I don't know, yeah. We can talk afterwards, yeah?
But I'm still going to come back to the point that I made before. You do not believe that Jesus is God or the Son of God.
Yes.
I do.
Okay.
But we both believe that we need to take Jesus seriously.
Yes.
Why can't we do that together?
Let's do that together, man.
What's your name anyway?
You are great, man.
Mohammed,
You are great. I love this discussion.
Yeah, it's good, man. Yeah. There's a little bit of something to think about. We'll talk about it later, Steve, yeah?
Yeah.